Do you want to make a difference in the world?
And see the lives of the people of India and all internationals transformed with the gospel?
As India goes, all Asia will go with it.
Living the Dream podcast provides tools for you to pray, give, and go
as you become an active participant in the Great Commission
and help your church's demographic represent the demographic of your community.
Get ready to find your strategy for reaching your community and changing the world here at Living the Dream podcast with your host, Pastor Kevin.
Good morning. I'm Pastor Kevin, founder and executive director of Global Hope India, and your host for Living the Dream podcast. This is where the church gathers to mobilize in order to effectively reach the community and change the world, including all the foreign-born internationals moving into our communities. I interview today's top church leaders from around the world so we can learn all we can about reaching internationals with the gospel and partnering with them in the Great Commission. It's time the church has this conversation. Go to globalhopeindia.org/resources for tools for your success. Now, let's jump into today's show. Before we welcome today's very special guest, Blaine Vorster, let me share some additional context with you. I'm incredibly honored to have Blaine on the show today. In fact, it really encouraged me when Blaine was scheduled to be with us. Blaine was born and raised in South Africa. He has been married for 2 years, has 2 boys, and he has 2 college degrees, one in history and one in theology. Blaine has worked several years as a school pastor, chaplain, as well as a high school history teacher. Soon after Blaine and Olivia got married, they felt a growing desire for the nation of France. Fun fact, believing that God was going to send them to minister in France, they actually spelled both of their sons' names in French. Blaine is now the pastor of the International Church of Grenoble, France. He is serving the internationals and the French and the Alps. He loves anything history as well as everything outdoor. Another fun fact, he and Olivia actually attended the same high school. They didn't meet in high school, but they were both featured in the very same musical, and years later looked back at the photo and realized they were side by side, but looking in opposite directions. So without further ado, Blaine, welcome to Living the Dream.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks very much. I'm glad to be here.
What an honor it is to have you here. I really can't wait to connect all these dots because here we are in the USA producing a podcast for American church staff and volunteers to help the church to reach internationals. So why in the world would I be so excited to have you on the show? You are one of the premier churches that I know that is effectively reaching internationals there in Grenoble. Talk to us about that. Let's get introduced first of all to Blaine and Olivia. So tell me some of the story that we don't yet know.
We've been in France for 2 years now, but
Okay.
really the journey for us started many years ago. Both of us loved the Lord, served in full-time ministry, and before we got married, and we really had a growing desire to serve God's people. And I always thought it would be in French-speaking Africa, which made sense for us, being from South Africa. But soon after we got married, that was 8 years ago, we just felt this growing desire to go to France, and we started to pray for the country. It was something we couldn't shake. And as we prayed over a map of France, the city jumped out at us, Grenoble. And so we began to pray for the city long before we had any connection there or knew anything about it. When things eventually fell into place, we were approached by the church in Grenoble to come and serve there. It was an amazing story for us to see that come about, to realize we'd been praying for these people long before they knew we existed. And it was such a privilege to go there and be a part of this church. It's a growing community. It's a very fluid community, as you would imagine, with international students, which make up the bulk of the congregation. It's very fluid. We have people coming for 3 months, 6 months. Anyone who's around for a year, we consider that a long-term member of the church. And so we're excited when we find out someone's there for a year or longer.
Yeah.
What's fantastic is in France, it's possible to study your postgraduates in English.
Okay.
So we find people from every corner of the globe. One of my particular highlights was a Bible study that we had with international students. And at that particular study, we were 13 people, and all 13 came from different nations. And so it was great to sit in this room that was completely international, but being united around God's word. And that was
13
really
different countries.
13 different countries.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've been honored to have Trey Vasek of Bridges International on the show before. And what an incredible interview. I hope our audience, if you haven't heard that, will go back and listen to Trey's interview. But he pointed out that many internationals, millions, 1.8 students are studying in the U.S., but there are over 6 million students worldwide that are going out of their home birth nation to another nation for their education.
That's right.
And you're experiencing that in Grenoble?
Yeah, certainly. Grenoble has just over 50,000 students in the city,
Wow.
of which 7,000 are international. These are English-speaking students that are studying in France.
Okay.
So it's not where you would expect to find them, but they certainly come from all over the world and find themselves all of a sudden in a completely different environment.
So you're a church, you're not a affiliate of Bridges International, but you are sharing a very similar mission that the Lord has placed you in as an outpost of the gospel there in the shadows of these foreign-born internationals living in Grenoble.
We didn't set out specifically to target internationals, but we find certainly that's the most effective place in sharing the gospel. We often say English is not our target group, but English is our strategy. French people, they're attracted by the language of English. They want to learn, and that becomes a good tool in order to share the gospel with people. In France particularly, it's only 1.6% evangelical Christian, and so most people have not met another Christian before. In many contexts where we're working with people, we realize that we are the very first, if not only Christian that they've met. It becomes a special privilege to share the gospel. One funny story, we have a French guy in our group, or in our congregation, whose family has a talent show every year at Christmas. And for part of the talent show, he shared a poem with the family. And so he read this, and everyone was amazed. They said it was such a beautiful poem, and they asked him if he wrote it and where it was from. And it was 1 Corinthians 13 about love. But nobody in the room had ever heard this poem before, this story before. And something that we would take so for granted is just not well known over there. And so what we find is with international students, they're so hungry for community. They're hungry to feel accepted. They come into this foreign culture, something that's so different, and they're desperate to connect. The way we do that often is just through sharing meals together. We eat together regularly as a congregation after church. And so in the beginning, you've got those that have come to the church because they're seeking out a church. But when they find out that there's meals to share, then they bring friends that are not there looking for a church. They're looking for food.
Yes, yeah.
Which is very much the norm with students, but particularly internationals, looking for family and fellowship.
Yeah, Jesus attended weddings and banquets.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And so he's always given us the example of how a meal can be useful to the gospel.
Yeah. And that's something we say to our families that are not moving around, so our stable families that are in the city. Whenever it comes to a big occasion like Christmas or Easter, we always find out who's going to be around, which students are going to be around, and we make sure that they've got a family to spend that with.
Yeah.
And very often they will bring a friend along with them.
Yeah.
And it just becomes the way that we build community.
I suspect most of our audience has that object, that table in their home, and they cherish the moments. We're empty nesters, my wife and I, and those moments when all of our kids are back and we're all around the table. What a blessing of God that is, to be gathered around the table, and how easy it is for us to take that for granted.
Yeah.
And then you're a foreign-born international and you're away from your family to begin with, and then you are spending a lot of your time alone, and meals are no longer a very desirable part of your day. But anytime you can have a meal with a family can be an incredible act of kindness and ministry into a foreign-born international's life.
It's as simple as that. I mean, we're not talking about debating deep philosophical issues. We're not talking about trying to dissect the Bible. We're just talking about having an open room and an open table. And it's really just loving people where they are, just inviting them in. And we find people from all sorts of different faiths that come attracted to that as well, because they're not coming for Christ, they're coming for food, but they're finding love and they're finding acceptance. And it really feels like a family, which is really what I think we're supposed to be as the church.
Yes.
Because they're there for a short period of time, there's a special kind of grace to go deeper than what we would normally do in a short period of time. And so people's lives are more open. because they're more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're finding acceptance, they're finding just fellowship with other people, community,
Mm-hmm.
they're willing to share a lot deeper and quicker than what you would find in a different context.
Yeah.
And so it is wonderful to see story after story
Mm-hmm.
of people. Very often we're sought out by Christians,
Mm-hmm.
but what's interesting in our particular context is it's often Christians that were probably very nominal in their faith. They were not necessarily practicing.
Mm-hmm.
They might have been in a Christian family, weren't attending church, but they get out into this new context and they crave something familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And so they seek out the church, and
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing to hear the life change that happens. And then when they go back home, to see them continue in that journey, you can just see God has brought them out there for a specific purpose,
Yeah.
and impacted their lives.
Yeah. There's several things I want us to bring about with out of Revelation 7.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you'd be willing just to read Revelation 7,
Sure.
9 through 12 for us and just remind us of God's word there.
Yeah, sure. It says, "After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. And they cried out in a loud voice, 'Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb.' All the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the 4 living creatures. They fell down on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, 'Amen. Praise and glory and wisdom and thanks and honor and power and strength be to our God forever and ever. Amen.'"
One of the prayers of our show is just that we, as brothers and sisters in Christ, would get comfortable with this future reality.
Yeah.
That's what heaven's going to look like. Every nation, every tribe, every tongue. And so there's no crime in going to an all-white church or an all-black church. But if your community is made up of a mix of nationalities, then long for that church, because we're going to be a part of that church someday, of every nation, every tribe, every tongue. And I want to celebrate this and just how a lot of times, we think that's futuristic, and yet, we can think the same thing about freedom in Christ. Whenever I get to heaven, I'll be free of this and free of that, and there's some reality there. But the gospel makes it very clear that there is a grace and provision of God, of freedom that we can experience here on earth.
Yeah.
And this same church we can experience here on earth. This same dream that we have in Revelation 7 is available to us here. And we can know the blessing of being gathered with the nations.
Yeah.
There's no small miracles of what God has done to take Blaine and Olivia from South Africa over to France. So walk us through that. How did that look for God to really call you to move to France?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We had no desire at all to be in Europe. We really thought it would be Africa. And in fact, as I was growing up, I said there's 2 careers I would never do. That's the worst 2 things in the world, and that is teaching or missions. And the Lord, in his sense of humor, took us through both of those. But yeah, we felt this growing desire for France. We spoke with our leaders about it. In fact, there was a time where we resigned our jobs. We gave away all our furniture to friends, and we went into a church planting school to just prepare a little bit longer. And it was during that time, 2 weeks after we made that decision, got rid of our salaries, got rid of our furniture, that we found out that my wife was pregnant with our eldest son, which at that moment we were beginning to question, God, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Did we really hear? But it really set us on this journey. And as you mentioned, we spelt our sons' names in French because we believed God was taking us there, and we were going to reach these nations. And we began to pray for the city of Grenoble. And for years we heard nothing. We were just waiting and praying and feeling this ache in our hearts to get to France. We've always had a heart for the nations, and we never saw how these 2 would fit together. How does France and the nations go together?
Wow.
And so for years we didn't see any breakthrough. My wife came to work at the school where I was working as well, and one day having a conversation with a co-worker who mentioned that she has family that lives in France, and they live in the city of Grenoble. And Olivia told her, well, that's amazing, we really want to be there. And this lady said to her, well, they actually happen to be in town at the moment. Would you like to meet them? And so we had coffee with a South African family that was living in Grenoble, who invited us to come and stay with them for a holiday. And so we did that over one of our anniversaries. We went to go stay with them. But in that lead up, we felt like God was telling us to sell our house. We did that. We put our house on the market, not knowing what was next, preparing just to go on holiday to Grenoble. And the day we moved out of our house, which happened to be a month before we went to Grenoble, we got a call from the church, from ICG, which this couple was a part. And they said, we've been praying for a pastor for 2 years. Would you consider changing your visit to an interview? And I mean, we came over for the visit. We walked into the church and we knew this is where we needed to be. And there were so many little things that fell into place, things that you cannot orchestrate or prepare for.
Yeah.
But how God shifted us and we moved into that position. And from day one, it's felt like home to us. It feels like this is where God had created us to be. And so we just love being there. And really, as you were talking about every tribe and nation and tongue, we are so much the richer for being able to be a community, of being a church with people from other nations.
Yeah.
For different food and culture and language and expressions. And I mean, when we read the Bible together to gain the insight of people that just think differently has definitely made us the richer.
Yeah, I resonate with that and really desire that our audience, my brothers and sisters in church leadership, would know that blessing. There's just a reality of experiencing God through the nations that we would lack if God had never taken me out of Western North Carolina over to India on my first trip. And I'm sure you identify with the same. So he moved you from South Africa over to Grenoble. Don't you love that you didn't have to beat the bushes and send out resumes and wait on the Lord? I mean, sometimes we have to go through that, but I'm glad that he really made your paths very straight. In that.
Well, I must say there were many days where we wanted to bang on every door we could, but it just nothing was opening. It really, when God opens the door, it just became so clear.
And now, a story from the mission field.
For the most part, we protect the volunteers from the U.S. that travel with us over to India. India is already a land of sensory overload. If you're not careful, you can get very distracted from the mission that you've traveled all the way to the other side of the world for distractions. And most of our teams are able to stay in hotels with English toilets. But there are those places in India that we do go for the sake of the gospel, and there is not an English toilet to be found anywhere around. And I remember just being with a team, and it was not a senior adult team, but they were older adults. The discomfort of using a squatty potty and being unable to squat, and the funny stories that would come out of that, the humility that would surface as a result of that, but just the honest sacrifice that was, that they would have to figure out a way to use a squatty potty without the ability to squat. We have faced it all and done it with hopefully more grace than with offense in those moments.
We want to give some local love to the award-winning team at Mako Medical, one of the most desired laboratories in the United States with the quickest turnaround time in the industry and one of the fastest growing companies in the Triangle region of North Carolina. We recognize their CEO, Chad Price, for his public witness for Christ and corporate practice of generosity. Mako is known for its extensive community service, supporting over 470 local nonprofits and charities, as well as Christian missionaries around the world and proud employers of military veterans. Check out their website at makomedical.com.
Global Hope India empowers the church in India through multiple channels. One of the most influential methods has proven to be sending individuals on short-term trips to India. During your 10 days in India, you will make a difference, be the hands and feet of Jesus, and see the lives of Indian internationals transformed by the gospel. We have opportunities in children's ministry, women's ministry, job training, medical missions, and more. Experience a life-changing adventure. If you're looking to make an impact, India is the place, and GHI is the opportunity. See our trips at globalhopeindia.org/go.
Know your numbers. Maybe you've seen the show Shark Tank, and you've seen the business owners come in to pitch to the sharks and explain why they're the right person to execute the vision for their business. Well, we believe that you are the right person to execute the vision for your church, and you need to know your numbers.
Here's something I find to be very interesting. I think you will as well. 18 to 29-year-old Christians, 14% are white, 22% are black, 32% are Asian, 25% are Latino, and 24% are mixed. So what this graph shows us is that there is a population boom of young Christian Asians between the ages of 18 and 29. So Asian young people are choosing Christ and becoming Christian. This demonstrates that Asian young people are open. Many of them are coming to Christ. This identifies an incredible opportunity for the church today and should give us hope as we build relationships with Asians that are 18 to 29 years of age. Know your numbers. Now you're going in to lead a local church. Did you know at the very beginning of interviewing that this was going to be an absolutely international church, not just in the name, but the entire congregation would be an international church like this, an outpost for internationals?
Yeah, so at the time, I mean, by the time we got there, we knew a fair bit about the church. And when I went over to interview, I preached a Sunday service, and we got to meet everyone that was there. Of course, by the time we got there, 9 months later, about 60% of those people had changed already because of the fluidity of the church. We knew what it was like. We had no idea what the challenges would be. I mean, there's no way to anticipate those things.
Did you know in South Africa, when you began praying for Grenoble, did you know then that God was calling you to reach internationals?
No, not at that stage. Okay. I mean, we didn't know really what it looked like at all. We just knew that the city was on our heart. We had a heart for the nations. We loved people from everywhere. And we knew that we were being called to France and to the French as well. And so we didn't see how these three things fit together. What's interesting in our church, even though it's an international church, if you add up all the people, including children, then 40% of the church are French people. So it means that the French are the largest demographic in the church, but the other 60% come from literally everywhere else.
Wow. I really applaud you for allowing God to give you grace for that shift, because there are churches, if you're going to be an effective outpost of the gospel in the USA, you better be prepared to make some shifts along the way. The face of your church in the last 5 years has probably changed, and definitely the face of your community has changed. So will you now shift and allow the face of your church to change? And it's going to change in 5 more years. So will you allow God to bring that in? And one of the points of the show is He is doing an international work. It doesn't have to be in the name of your church. That's not the point. I'm not trying to change churches' names, but it should be in the attitude of our hearts to just welcome the nations.
Yeah.
And realize that the word of God is for all nations, and He's up to something very strategic. So now let's talk about that, because He took you from South Africa to Grenoble. Now He's using you to sow seeds of the gospel into countless foreign-born internationals, and these are people you have a very temporary window, 1 year, 3 years, and then they're going back. You're like the Lord's seminary to prepare people for ministry, to bring them in, disciple them, and then send them back out to their people. Yeah. What have you seen God do, using you to send the gospel around the world?
Yeah, I mean, we really take that approach that we're a sending church. We've got people for a small period of time. And then they're going to go. And we liken it a lot to that story in Acts about when Philip meets the Ethiopian on the road. He's got a short period of time with him. He shares the gospel, and then he takes the gospel back with him. And that's an amazing opportunity. I think of 2 particular stories that have really had bearing on me from two students. The one was a Chinese family that came to the church. And they didn't actually come to the church for church's sake, but we had a couple in the church that were offering free French lessons for internationals. And it was just a way of connecting to people. They found faith, became members of the church, and so they served in the church, and then were taken back to China for about 2-3 years. And then they came back to Grenoble again, sought out the church, continued to be a part of the church. And what was amazing is the husband in this Chinese family then brought his mother across from China. Now, she had never heard the gospel either. She'd never encountered the word. And he got her a Bible, and while she was in France, she began to read the Bible for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And he would then bring her along to church. She didn't speak a word of English. She didn't speak a word of French either. And I remember engaging with him and saying to him, are you helping her out with translation or anything like that? He said, no, she just needs to be here. He says, if she sits in the presence of God, if she sees the love around her, she's going to experience God. And that is so encouraging to me, because it goes beyond language. It goes beyond who you even focusing to reach. We had no idea that we would be reaching someone in China just by having a meal together and celebrating. And so she came to faith, and that's an amazing story. That family has now gone back to China. And so we're trusting that the Lord continues to use them. Another lady that we had with us she's Italian. She spent a couple of months with us. She was part of our church and the Bible study. And something that we do in the Bible study is teach a very simple method of reading the Bible, of hosting Bible study, because we know that every person who's going out from us now has the potential to start up their own Bible study wherever they go.
Yeah.
And she went back to her church in Italy when she'd finished studying with us, found out that their pastor had cancer and that he was going to have to step down. There was no other church. And so this community realized that they were going to shut down. They were going to lose their community as a church. And she stepped up and said, look, I learned a very simple method of Bible study. It's easy to do. And so this community continues to meet. This is now more than a year later. And they're busy reading the Bible, just something simple she learned as she passed through our doors. And we're encouraged by those stories.
Yes.
We've seen people come from really unreached places and they've gone back. We're not able to track every story, but we do ask people to share their stories with us as far as we can. And so it's amazing. We're seeing the world being reached in one place. And certainly God is doing this. I think as he moves people around the world, wherever it may be, it's because it creates this openness and this vulnerability. And certainly his seed can take root and then they can take it back.
Yeah. I love in verse 10 of Revelation 7, it says, salvation belongs to our God. And that's what you're describing. This word, this glorious gift of good news of salvation is really the asset of God.
Yeah.
And it doesn't belong to your church, and it doesn't belong to your nation. It's not a South Africa asset. It's not a French asset. This is God's. And so he brings people in. He gives them salvation, and then he takes them and uses that gift in other places.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, this is our experience. It was certainly not what we're anticipating, or anticipated beforehand, but it's certainly what we're seeing.
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
So you said something earlier that I really want our audience to hear. I can get frustrated in those movies where they keep flipping from present to past, present to past. We're going to do that for just a moment, because you said that there was a couple that contacted you while you were in South Africa and said, will you come and allow this visit to turn into an interview? Of a couple that you met that was a part of the welcome team at Grenoble when you came from South Africa.
Yeah.
Their names are Frank and Janet.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's a connection to North Carolina and Hope Community Church in Raleigh, North Carolina. Share with our listeners that connection, because it's another evidence of God moving internationally with the gospel.
Frank and Janet tell this story often because it's such a miraculous story, really. They were transferred because of work to come over to North Carolina, and it was supposed to be a much longer contract, but it was only 2 years in the end because of the financial crisis that hit.
So they are from France.
They are French.
Yep.
They are as French as you get, and they are proudly French. And that's So they came over to North Carolina, and quite early on over here, they were invited through one of their daughter's friends. They were invited to attend a local church here. It was a Hope Community Church.
So were they Christians when they came here?
They were not Christians at all.
Oh.
But they had read about the fact that they were coming into the Bible Belt. They were interested to see what that was, and they said they went to church as part of a social experiment. They wanted to just learn the culture and experience it. And they came, they were blown away. They didn't understand half of what was going on. There was language barriers. There were so many things, but they decided to keep coming back and coming back diligently and faithfully, and they found Christ over here. It changed their lives, and they were so devastated when the financial crisis hit and their company recalled them back to France. They didn't want to go. They wanted to stay here because of what had happened. But they were called back to France, and they came to this church, to the ICG. They wanted to stay within an English context because that's where they'd found Christ. And they have worked so hard to pour into this church because of what God has done in them.
Yeah.
And they brought about the connection that really helped us to come across as well. I mean, their connection with Hope became a connection that helped us move from South Africa as well. It was one of the doors that opened up for us and fostered relationship. And so that has been hugely impactful in our journey.
International Church of Grenoble is a missions partner of Hope Community Church, and they've been instrumental in empowering you as you build the base there and set up the outpost. It seems that you're describing that when God moved you over, he gave you co-workers in the gospel. And I love that he actually brought them to the U.S. to receive the gospel and then sent them back to join the leadership of a local church.
Yeah.
What is their role today?
Frank is currently working as the treasurer. So the roles changed quite a bit in the church. Everyone is volunteers. Their real heart and their passion because of what they experienced is evangelism. And so they put all their time into doing that. And how can we reach not only internationals, but how can we reach the French? And that's their big heart. Because of what the Lord did for them.
What an amazing God to bring them to the U.S., allow them to receive the gospel here, and then send them back to reach the French there in Grenoble. Great. Any other facets of that relationship dynamic that's been a blessing to you and Olivia?
Well, it's been hugely supportive for us. I mean, just one of the things that we benefit is the relationship, being able to ask our questions as we're figuring things out in the mission field. You know, we're still really fresh and really new, and we don't have the whole thing figured out. So it's great to be able to relate to people and receive that kind of support that we get from Hope. And the relationship, it's been hugely beneficial for us.
So, Blaine, what has God been pounding in your heart lately?
It's how to best equip those that are with us for such a short period of time. If someone's with us for 3 months, we don't want to waste any time in that. We want to make sure that when they come through our doors, something happens. We want to make sure that people love the Lord, that they know the Lord, that they're reading the Bible for themselves, and that they have a healthy respect and understanding of the church, that wherever they go from us, that they would become a part of a local church or start a local church if they don't have one in their city.
Blaine, it sounds like you're confessing you don't have it all figured out.
Oh, certainly not.
And I love that, because I don't ever want to give an idea to our audience that this is a show that has it all figured out, and so they better have it figured out as well. And this is us just trying to experience God and join him in his work.
I mean, one of my Bible teachers said to me, you know, God's word is like a light unto our feet. It's a lamp unto our path. And it's really a lamp just lights up enough for you to take that next step. It's not a spotlight that's blazing the trail ahead. And so we don't know what lies ahead, but we know enough to follow each next step as God leads us.
Is there a word or passage that really drives you right now?
For me, really, at this point, Psalm 23 just stays a key one for me. Just in the nature of the work, in the busyness that happens, is just finding rest by the Lord, finding rest in the Lord. And with him being the shepherd that's guiding and leading us, there's so many unknown factors. There's so much fluidity. There's so much work to be done. The city that we live in, specifically Grenoble, is 0.9%. Christian, and so it can feel overwhelming on many days where we walk around and we look around us and say none of these people around us know Christ. Those days do break our hearts, and then to realize that but the Lord is our shepherd. He's the one that's guiding us. He's the one where we find our rest in the midst of all the busyness, and trusting that he loves and cares for this flock in the same way. The fact that he leaves the 99 to find the one, that's something that we hold on to, in knowing as much as he loves us, he loves each of these people who don't know him yet the same. And as much as our hearts are broken, his is so much more for those who don't know. And so we trust him to do the work.
Blaine, I'd love for you just to envision for a moment sitting at a very big table, and on the other side, around the room, is precious church leaders and volunteers from across the world. They're leaning in. What would you say to encourage them as they take on this call of reaching internationals God is bringing into their communities?
Well, I think just the first thing I would say is that it's worth it. It's really worth it. It's not such a big step to take. It's not so far the distance to cross to reach someone, and it's not difficult either. As I've said before, it's as simple as an extra plate at the table. It's as simple as saying to someone, you're welcome. Something that we've seen is just greeting someone in their own language.
Mm-hmm.
Hugely opens. You don't have to speak the language. Just greeting in their language, it breaks down so many walls.
Yeah.
Because it tells people that you're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I would encourage people to do. Welcome, love those around you. It's as simple as that.
I'm still amazed at being from North Carolina, very light skin, but being at a function in Mooresville where the largest minority are Indian nationals, and being there at a festival activity there and just greeting them, namaste. And it's like, oh, you know, and as soon as I say, where are you from? And then, oh, I've been to Hyderabad, I've been to Mumbai, how it just fosters so much trust to them. But they absolutely love to be greeted in their home language.
Yeah, for sure.
Mabuhay, if you're from Philippines. And what are some other greetings that you use?
Well, I must say my languages are limited, but because we're so international, it's the first question we ask people, where are you from?
Yeah.
And whenever we hear where they're from, we connect them with someone who speaks the language because we can. I mean, we're unique in that. We had a case of a Brazilian woman that came to the church. She had been actually in the city for a number of years, hadn't found any connection. She just walked in these doors and she was in a particularly bad and broken place. And we had a French woman in the church who had lived in Brazil for 5 years. And when she heard this woman was Brazilian, she greeted her according to Brazilian custom, and the walls just broke down. She completely opened up and said that was amazing because it was just as simple as that.
So how would you encourage? What would be a practical next step?
It's crossing the road. I mean, it's really, is there somebody that's in my community that is not like me?
Yeah.
Because chances are if they're not like me, they're not like a lot of people around me, and they're going to be looking for family. They're going to be looking for connection.
Yeah.
And so it's having eyes open and the willingness to step out. You know, nobody's going to cross the road for you. You've got to take that step.
Yeah.
Scripture's quite clear about how we need to welcome the foreigner. And so much of the rhetoric out there is about getting rid of the foreigners.
Yeah.
And as the church, we lead in this. We're the ones that can open up hearts and hands. And so
be it.
That would be my encouragement. Take the step, because it's worth it.
Yeah, I love that. I really want our listeners to think about that. Are you willing to just simply, the next foreigner that you see, Foreign Born International, are you willing to just have a conversation where you just simply welcome them to your community, welcome them to your state, to the U.S.? I really appreciate that. Blaine, is there anything that we've missed, anything that you were really hoping to get to share with us?
I just want to add to that in terms of testimony, coming to France as a foreigner, and not fitting in. I mean, we arrived and we only knew bonjour, and that was it.
Yeah.
And there was a day in which we met with other French believers, and they came to us and said, "You are welcome here."
Yeah.
And gave us a hug. It really meant the world to us. And I think that can do the same for someone else.
Yeah. Well, way to set up just one of the fundamental missions of Global Hope India, because we facilitate short-term mission teams over to India. And whether your people group are Indian nationals or whether they're Chinese or Korea, I cannot recommend enough that you get out of your comfort zone and you become a foreigner. If you really want to show Christ's love to a foreigner and truly welcome them, become like them. There's a lot of research that breaks my heart about the number of Americans that have passports, but how it shrinks down to less than 3% have ever traveled to India. And so just as the body of Christ, that we would get on a short-term mission team, realizing that where God guides, he provides. He's called us, and he said, as the Father sends me, now I am sending you. And to live sent. Your church is a great sending station, and to just live sent. If you've never been on an international mission trip, then let this be the year. No more excuses. Just go for 10 days. The ministry's not going to collapse. You will be much better as a result. But put yourself in the shoes of a foreigner. You will have so much more compassion. And I call it the red car factor. It's like buying that red car, and all of a sudden you drive around and all you see is the red cars that you never noticed before. And I've seen that with 1,000 people that we've taken over to India. They come back and all of a sudden they're noticing Indian nationals in the market and in their office and in the doctor and in the school and everywhere, and they're able to say, I've been there, and to really identify what it's like to travel to the other side of the world and to be a foreigner and to be empowered to really reach internationals here in the U.S. Thanks for pointing that out to us. And thank you so much. What a blessing it is to have you from France. What a gift of God to have you in the USA for this interview. I hope it's one of many, and we'll continue to support and pray for you and Olivia and the team there. God bless you in your work.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. Such a privilege to be here.
We want to hear from you. I'm serious. We've set up a dedicated phone line to record your 3-minute story at 817-66-DREAM. That's 817-66-DREAM. What's your biggest challenge when reaching internationals? We want to know. Call 817-66-DREAM and leave your message. If we pick your message, we'll send you a free Living the Dream t-shirt. Check it out on our website. It's 817-66-DREAM, 817-66-DREAM. This episode is complete, so head over to globalhopeindia.org for show notes and more resources for your success. Continue to find your strategy for reaching your community and changing the world here at Living the Dream.